but meditation increases the speed at which you look at subjects and make them objects.
My one other big question around the integral level is, does it take away the notion of objective truth, right? It doesn't. Okay, talk to me about that a little bit. Because sometimes when we hear about it, it's like, well, all these levels have partial truth, right? And so we have to like honor that and expect it. But does it take away, from any form of objective truth?
Right. Well, each stage also, generally speaking, very generally speaking, has the capacity to, when it's looking at a previous stage, it's going to make a judgment about how accurate that stage is according to its own values. And so when even rationality was the leading edge during the Western Enlightenment, there still was a huge battle between rational science and mythic religion. And not even the people that were on the rational side of the argument fully embraced all of that. I mean, that's what you see when you see the discussions that went on between various members of the Enlightenment about, well, how, to put it in simplified terms, how true is our truth versus what religion has to say, or what parts of religion do we accept and what parts should we rationally deny? And those are real questions. Those are really important. And Orange rationality would tend to deny those obviously illiberal or irrational aspects of religion. So they might believe in the moral aspects of religion, particularly to the extent that they were embracing truly world-centered, rational ideas. For example, Thomas Jefferson, who is clearly a very rational human being, he nevertheless went through the Bible. There's an apocryphal image of Thomas Jefferson sitting on the White House steps, and with a pair of scissors, he was going through the Bible and cutting out all the magic and mythic and supernatural aspects. And he actually did that. It was published as something that was called the Jefferson Bible. What? And all you get from that is this orange rationality that was in the Bible, because some people did have a degree of rationality that were right.
Wow, that's fascinating. I never heard that one before. That's amazing. Yeah.
So by the time you get to teal and turquoise, which are the two major stages at integral second tier, they have rationality on their side. And the fact that green denies an objective truth, that wasn't any part of the partial truth that green brought. That was a result of the exaggerated and dysfunctional aspect of green that was generated during the culture wars. Mm-hmm. And so one of the ways that it loved to get back at orange rationality was just to deny that there's any objective truth. That was a result of the culture wars. That's not a result of what green would do in itself.
Got it. Okay.
So in itself, it would transcend and include rationality. And of course, most of the time, it did that when it was thinking everyday stuff. It was always thinking rationally, basically. And then when it would have to rationally think about what it was going to present, the values it was going to display, then it would rationally include irrational things. Mm-hmm. And that was just sort of its way of getting back in the culture wars. But teal and turquoise both employ rationality. The only difference is that when you get to something like turquoise, which is the leading edge of second tier, it is starting to transcend rationality. It's starting to enter what we call third tier, which is some very advanced, less than 1% of the overall population. But if you have turquoise operating in you, and by the way, the actual percentage of people at turquoise, if you look in the book Spiral Dynamics, which was written over 20 years ago, so it was at an early phase in where turquoise was, but it gave 0.5% of the population at turquoise, 3 to 4% at teal.
Right.
So what starts happening as turquoise starts to become 10% or greater of your own makeup, which you eventually will if you keep growing. You start to tap into third tier. And third tier traditionally is the home of a lot of mystical elements. And so, like the first tier in third tier tends to have a much higher percentage of the population having a cosmic consciousness experience, or an experience of being one with the entire material world. As you get higher in third tier, you'll have states of development that tend to have a high percentage completely dominate subtle stages. And at the very highest of third tier, you'll have ones that are in dominating causal state.
Yeah, so we're getting into some territory here that's super cutting edge, which I know is really alive in your work right now. And we've talked about it before. And for those of you that are listening, what this means is that evolution doesn't end, meaning that we are continuing onward and upward, right, towards growing, right? And becoming the best version of ourselves. And I am going to ask you, at the end of this conversation, what are the best ways that we can practice to go through these stages and these levels faster, because this is what growth is. And I know that no matter what stage we're at in our modern world, we can employ tools that can help us kind of grow faster. And by the way, just having this conversation helps, right? Because just, having awareness of the structure, having awareness of the framework allows us to actually see where we're at so we can grow faster.
Well, one of my primary and actually first on the list of recommendations for people to do is to increase their intellectual understanding of what will happen if they increase their intellectual level of understanding. And so these kinds of talks are exactly what is recommended, because when we're basically at a stage of development that we're going to get consciously involved with, then we have to consciously understand why it's important and what's happening and what am I supposed to do. And that currently you get through reading books on the subject or talking with somebody about it, or any way you can to increase your understanding of why is growing up important. And most people have no idea, first of all, that they're even going through stages in their own growing up. And second of all, that they can increase their higher stages in their growing up. And the vast percentage of the population has no understanding of either one of those concepts.
Right. So having the conversations, doing what we're doing here and listening to these conversations helps. But I've also heard you talk about how meditation and staying in silence and observation and contemplation are also key factors in. Talk about that for a moment.
Yeah. And they're generally my second on my overall list of things to do. What happens whenever you discuss this is I'll just use a phrase and then explain what I mean by it. You're making subject object. Now, what that means is that each of these stages of growing up, you have a different subjective identity. And each time you move to a higher stage, you can become aware of that previous stage. And in other words, what you had as a subject is now become an object of a higher subject. And developmentalists from Robert Keegan on have pointed out that in development, the subject of one stage becomes the object of the subject of the next stage. And I just simply started looking at that and found out that not only did it apply to that, it applied to a whole lot of other areas as well. And every time you make subject into object, you're increasing your field of awareness. And so that's what actually happens in meditation. What do you do in meditation? You look within, you get quiet, and you simply watch how your thought arises. And at some point, the thoughts that are arising are going to be part of your subjective identity, but you're seeing them now as an object. And so meditation increases the speed at which you look at subjects and make them object. Because to make a subject object simply means to look within and increase your awareness of what's going on. And that way you'll see subjects, and every time you see a subject, you've made it an object of your seeing, of your awareness. And so that's important.